All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It is Tuesday. So glad to be with you. And let's get right to it. I did call this program, by the way, We Are in Pain. Well, that's We Are in Pain. Is there an antidote? Loneliness, sad. We're lonely. We're sad. We're crazy. We're violent. America is, and I've used the term seething cauldron. We're not getting better. It doesn't appear. This particular topic for this program was really inspired by an email I get from Los Angeles Times. I'm on their email list, and I've signed up for lots and lots of different emails, and I get them, and then I periodically unsubscribe. So I always am a little leery of unsubscribing. To be honest, I'm sometimes more leery of unsubscribing than subscribing because I'm concerned I'm going to miss something like this. This was from Essential California, and I don't know if you can read the text at the bottom, but I'll read to you in just a second. But I don't know, this image just really kind of struck me. It really appealed to me. And perhaps because it's somewhat familiar. I mean, this is from Albertsons. I certainly remember the Albertsons in Carmel where I would shop '06 to '09 and then moved back to Monterey. But I don't think that's not that Monterey. This is LA Times. They're probably from LA, but in Los Angeles. But I shop at Safeway, which is a parent company, or Albertsons, I guess now the parent company for Safeway. I'm not sure they merged, is my understanding, and they both use signature brands and all that. But this is a similar look, right? I mean, this could be anybody's grocery store, and you see the smiling checkout lady, and then the woman who is writing her check, and yet she doesn't seem all that bothered by it. The point of the article is that these kinds of day-to-day, daily interactions are important for staving off loneliness, and they're becoming fewer and farther between. So we are having less interaction with our with other people. It just happens much less frequently. And I would add, and this is not in the article, but I would add that to the extent we do have interactions with others, they have become so transactional, right? We're trying to get something from somebody else. Now, you could say this is a transactional relationship. Obviously, it is. But they're relatively equal. It's not a situation where they're dickering over the price or there's some kind of will you do this for me if I do that for you? There's no really tit for tat. I mean, the checkout lady scanned the groceries, put them in the bag for the woman who is in the foreground. So yes, there is transaction involved, but it's not where either one is trying to get something special, something extra out of it. So I think that's why this type of relationship, this type of interaction is providing something of real value, certainly to the customer, but I think also to the checkout lady, right? I mean, it's not the greatest job in the world in certain ways, and I'm not going to demean any work whatsoever, and some of the aspects to it that sometimes might make me less inclined to want to be a checkout person might also make it more interesting, or at least if not interesting, more appealing, right? You don't have to, a lot of it is somewhat robotic or it's already set out. So there are fewer mistakes you're going to make. You don't have to think as much. You can kind of get through the day and in a kind of a reverie, kind of like when you're just putting one foot in front of the other. I remember feeling that way when I was working as a server at a restaurant. Servers in restaurants are short order cooks, similar. So all work to me has great value. And when I was working as an attorney, I will say, and I don't mean again to put anything down anybody's job, it did require me to think more, probably exercise my mind more, but it was very, very stressful, very, very anxiety provoking, and left less time for me to do other things in my life and to stretch myself and to stretch my mind and body in other ways. So all work has great value, and obviously this is a valuable interaction between these two. At least you can tell by the picture. So we're losing that. We're losing that because of technology. We're also losing that because, of simply, the great unraveling of society, which I describe as there's no understanding of what being part of our American society means. There's no guarantee. There's no security. You're on your own, bottom line. You're basically on your own. You're on your own to scan your groceries. You're on your own to make enough money to pay the bills. No one's going to help you, unless you come from a family that's able to provide that support for you, which I fortunately am. But you're basically on your own, and it's lonely, it's scary, it's depressing. It also causes people to make choices. I won't say they're bad choices. I'm not going to criticize people for the choices that they make when they're, up against it. But we make desperate decisions on occasion. We may not even realize we're desperate when we're making them. This also came to my mind. And let me just pull back for just a sec as I move on to sort of a related story, but also going to the idea of lonely, crazy, and violent. Don't forget, click subscribe, click like. Subscriptions are going up. I want to see more likes. The video I did on Ukraine with Bill Neal Thursday had a lot of views. It's done really well. I want to see more people liking it as a result. Obviously, of them appreciating it. I thought, well, maybe it's Bill because Bill promoted it, and I'm sure that helped. But that video about Ukraine did a lot better even than the one we did on Jamie Raskin, which I thought was a really good one, by the way. One of the concerns I've had, and I'm not going to stop doing it, if you're one of my loyal few, you're my loyal handful, you're my loyal dozen, whatever, loyal dozens, and you really want to watch Halitics, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. But I do want to see this, get more and more viewers. I want to talk to you, 240-363-7190. I think that's a function of viewers. They used to say for every one call you have 10 viewers, or maybe it was every one call you have 100 viewers or listeners on radio. So that's probably accurate. When I did my radio program, I got a lot of calls. They were usually, kind of the usual suspect, but I would get random calls too, people I didn't know, sometimes from people listening online in other countries. It was very, very exciting. I think radio generally, because it was appointment, in other words, you didn't have to listen live, but that was the general feeling. You had to listen live. So people, were listening live and they could call in. A lot of people now don't have to listen live. And again, you're losing, it's the same thing, right? We're losing that one-to-one relationship, that contact that you see in that very nice picture here that just really struck me from Essential California, LA Times. So we're losing that even when we do these live streams. I'm talking into the ether. There's no one in the room that I'm in right now. Used to have Coach in there. Used to have a call screener sometimes. Sometimes I did it on my own, of course. That's all pretty much gone. And I think that is a big reason for the loneliness. Also, you're just watching at your leisure when you feel like it, rather than, hey, let's all gather communally, which I think would be very, very nice. So again, call in 240-363-7190 if you're listening live. Let's make this a true communal event and also try to come to solutions together. So click like, click subscribe. But what also drove this particular topic, and I will get to the ask. The ask, there's always a general ask. The general ask is, please, at least at a minimum, the least you should do, I believe, as a good citizen, is vote for the most progressive candidate. And I always used to say the most progressive viable candidate. I'm going to kind of pull back from that a little bit because a lot of people would say, well, I hear this all the time, Dr. West isn't viable. So my answer to that is, well, make him viable. If you're part of the media, get to it. I saw this video with David Packman, someone shared this at Halitics on Facebook, and the group Halitics, which you can join also. Love to have you join us there, where we have a nice real core of conversation there. And I think it's nice because there's a back and forth, and it's not only your own view that's reflected. You'll see different perspectives on Halitics, which I think is critical. I think we have to be willing to talk to each other, as frustrating as it can be. We have to be willing to talk, and we have to be willing to reconsider our views. It's very, very difficult. I find that difficult. I know others find it difficult, perhaps more so than I do. I don't know. But that's been my understanding. That's been my sense, is that I am more open. Of course, I'm going to say this, right? I don't know if this is just my bias, but even people that I have great respect for, like Arlen, like Vernon, I don't see them open to reconsidering their views, but I'm sure that's what they would say about me. The ask, vote for the most progressive, usually viable candidate. If there's two progressive candidates in a race, then always vote for the more, if there's two equally good progressives in a race, vote for the more viable one. If there's only one progressive, then maybe you vote for that progressive, even if they're not that viable. And that's kind of where I am with West. I have a litmus test. I can't vote for candidates whom I believe are making things worse. And on balance, I think Biden makes things worse. I also think Trump, on balance, makes things worse. I think overall, Trump tends to make things even worse than Biden. And this has been an issue for me because, I hear Arlen, you have to vote for Biden. And I got an email yesterday talking about how the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, I believe supporting workers is an absolute must. It's a litmus test. I don't believe the Biden administration has been very good about supporting workers. I think it has not supported workers. But the NLRB came out with a very, very good decision, which will make it much easier for workers to organize at the workplace, assuming, and this is a huge assumption, a huge if, assuming if the Supreme Court doesn't reverse those rules. And I fear they will. But basically, the rule says if a corporation uses dirty means to defeat a vote for a union, then the NLRB will automatically recognize the union. What's happened in the past is that employers will use captive audience events where they basically require you to go to a lecture where you're told about the horrors of unions. You see videos about how bad unions are. There are threats made, often covert, that if you vote to unionize, we're going to shut down this plant, which is illegal, by the way. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. We'll shut down this operation, this store, if you vote to unionize. So that's all illegal. And what the NLRB has said, if you do that now and the union vote is no, then we will automatically recognize the union in retaliation for your using illegal means to defeat the referendum. What's happening up until now is there's just another vote. So the NLRB kicks the can down the road, and the corporation is rewarded because of all the time, the energy that the unions have to expend, and they still don't get the vote. They still don't get a binding referendum if the corporation is able to defeat it with dirty means by violating the law. So this is a really good decision by NLRB, but I'm really waiting for the other shoe to drop. And when I read this, I was thinking, well, that is a big difference because Biden does appoint judges to the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, who are more progressive than the judges that would be there. I mean, they're somewhat progressive, unlike obviously any Republican would nominate. That is a big difference. But then you look at some other Supreme Court rulings that both Democratic and Republican appointees, nominees have supported that make it much harder for unions. And it's a little less clear that Biden is the champion of labor and Trump is the diehard opponent. Trump, again, talking about, for example, tariffs, which are critically important. I mean, you can have all the labor organizing you want, but if your plant is moved overseas, shuts down, and has to close, and maybe has to close because of the cost of competing with a manufacturer who pays labor $1 an hour, it doesn't matter if you have a union because your plant is going to close. That is less of a factor, of course, in retail because we have retail in this country, but retail is under tremendous pressure from online retail, online merchants. So that's even there. You could see your brick and mortar store close where you work. So there's a lot of factors involved, but yes, the NLRB decision, and maybe we'll talk about that later in the week. The point, though, I'm making is, in general, you vote for the most viable progressive candidate, and if there's no progressive, either you probably don't vote. I mean, I just think it's just such a problem to have to choose between two candidates, both of whom are bad, and that's where I see us with Biden and Trump. Maybe locally, we've got better options, maybe. I don't know. All right, let me get into the lonely, violent, crazy situation. And this story really hit home for me also. I showed you the two women talking at the checkout. And my belief is, yes, we are losing these places where people communicate on relatively equal bases in a non-transactional way. And that's a very significant factor in why we're lonely. Even when we do interact with people, it's trying to get something from them, buying, selling, purely transactional. When you see the two at the Safeway or Albertsons, clearly they're sharing a moment, and that is why that helps stave off that event. That helps stave off a little bit of the loneliness that, so many of us, the emptiness of life in the 21st century, in the hard right neoliberal age, corporate world that we live in. So let me get to this next story, which I think kind of exemplifies why people do things that lead to often tragic results. And I think it's the same thing, this ultra transactional world we live in, where there are some people who have nothing, others who have everything, and most are barely getting by. This hit home because it's about the University of Maryland football coach. My son William is a huge Terrapin fan. I've learned an awful lot about Maryland sports from him. Here's the head coach, Mike Locksley. I have not in the past been a fan of Coach Locksley. There were incidents when he was coaching, I think it was New Mexico, maybe it was New Mexico State, I think it was New Mexico. There were some incidents there. He hasn't always behaved like a great citizen, but he also has experienced recent tragedy in his family with his son dying. I believe he was murdered. Or maybe it was an overdose, I'm not sure, but he was kind of living in the life, and we know now a lot more about why that happened. Here's Coach Locksley talking about that.
The game of football gave me a degree. I met my wife. I had a family because of it. It was my way out. But I also think that it's important for me to walk the line between being football coach while also being parent to a son diagnosed with CTE. Does it hurt that I lost my son? 100% it does. But I also will tell you truthfully that the game also gives a lot.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. This is courtesy of the New York Times, and I hope they're not going to do something with this live stream because I played that video or portions of it. I don't think they will because that is off of YouTube, and I believe I have I think there's a fair use of it. But I just want to commend them That was a great video, and there's a lot more to it. I played the first 45 seconds. So Coach Loxley's son played football. There's a lot more to it. I'm not going to show you all of it because I really don't want to overstay or I don't want to take too much from another distributor's video. But there's a lot more to it with the mom, Coach Loxley and his wife watching video of their son Micah playing football at 7 years old. They talk about how he got a concussion or two. She never worried about it. It didn't look like anyone was getting hurt. And, this was a boy who had a lot of joy. I think there's a nice picture here of, but as time went on, he did start to to hallucinate and was ultimately diagnosed with schizophrenia in his early 20s, which is usually when mental illness comes on. So there's the happy family. And Micah's all the way to the left. I think there's another son who's not shown in this picture, and the daughter is to the right. And he got into drugs. I'm not sure whether it was an overdose or how exactly he died, but after he died, I think at 21 or 22, the body was given to this University of Massachusetts study on people who played football and what happens to their brains. And they did determine that he had suffered at a very young age chronic CTE, chronic encephalitis. Then there's I don't know what the T stands for, but this is the result of the pounding of the head. So Coach Loxley says about football, it was my way out of a very, tough circumstances, tough economics, was because he was somewhat gifted at playing football, but much more gifted at coaching football. And he lost his son now, he believes, and it seems very, I can't say with absolute certainty, but it sure seems like the mental illness that overcame Michael Loxley was the result of having played football from a very young age. So the coach is obviously conflicted because, as he says, the game gave him a lot. But ultimately, we put people in a situation where their choices are so limited. Play football, coach a violent game, or you can face an impoverished life for the rest of your life. Very, very likely. There are some alternative ways out, and if you're extremely hardworking, gifted in a particular academic field, or you're a musical talent, or you can act, you can entertain people, you can get out. But the deck is so stacked against people who grow up, and I don't want to just say, oh, this is because they're African American. I mean, that's part of it. It's poverty. It's poverty. People living in desperate times, desperate situations, where only if they have a particular gift or talent are they likely, it's not impossible, but it's so much harder. There's so little social mobility that people will embrace all sorts of options that they might well not otherwise. They don't really have a choice. It's a Hobson's choice. Either you take the lame horse or you take no horse. That's your choice. That's hardly a real choice. And that's what we say to people in America today. We even say it to middle class people, to upper middle class people. We say it to wealthy people. Hey, you want to get even richer? You're going to have to exploit the environment. You're going to have to take advantage of other people. You're going to have to treat people like they're disposable. If you have employees, you've either got to refuse to give them wages, threaten to move your manufacturing plant overseas, or actually shut down operations to prevent a nascent union movement, or you're going to go out of business. I thought one of the, I remember Tom Hartman saying, well, if you can't pay your workers, a living wage, you shouldn't be in business. But that's just such a cop-out answer. That's just such a load of crap. Because everybody, at least if you're in a small business, you're desperate to, the margins are so thin. Every little, dollar saved here or penny saved there makes a difference. If you don't cut your margin, if you don't cut costs at every opportunity, you may well go bankrupt. That said, if you're able to somehow surmount those challenges, you can become wealthier than your wildest imaginations. So we're putting all of us in this circumstance where we're fighting for crumbs often. We're putting our own health at risk. We're risking our own children's lives, as Loxley, I guess, belatedly realizes. Or fighting for an enormous slice of pie that only one person's going to get. That's what America is today. It is no wonder. Of course, we're violent. Of course, we're crazy. Of course, we're sad. How could we not be? How could we not be under these circumstances? Let me play. I think Bernie kind of sums it up. I want to play this. I was going to play something from PBS, right? Public Broadcasting. But let me get this on first. And I do want to hear from you, please. 240-363-7190. That's what, I want to create that community and also maybe come up with some solutions. We're going to end the program. My gosh, I've already been into this for already over a half hour or about a half hour. Started a little late. Apologize for that. Still fighting the cold, the COVID. But not taking a lozenge. Hopefully I'll get through this without needing one. All right, let's get to this. Here's Bernie. I want to just give you the whole screen for Bernie. Well, there's the little CNN.
Number of areas. But the reality is that today, 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. We have massive levels of income and wealth inequality. 3 people or more wealth in the bottom half of America. Our healthcare system is a total disaster. 85 million people uninsured, underinsured, while the insurance companies make huge profits. The cost of pharmaceutical drugs, prescription drugs, sky high. So the point is, in my view, the president should tout his very good record. We have got to continue to defend women's right to control their own bodies. But we have to deal with the reality of life today. That's what Roosevelt did back in 1936. And that is to understand that we have massive levels of corporate greed in every part of society. Very rich are getting richer, working people are struggling. We have got to make it clear. We're going to stand with those workers. We're going to have a healthcare system that works for all, lower the cost of prescription drugs, raise the minimum wage to a living wage.
All right, so I agree with everything Bernie said, 100%. And that came from his conversation where he tells Dana Bash, you still have to vote for Joe Biden, who's overseeing this incredibly unjust, unequal America. And I'm like, well, wait, I don't understand. You just told us why we're all so miserable, why things are so bad. And now we have to keep doing what we've been doing. That's led us to this place. It's mind-boggling to me. And again, I kind of went back on that. There's NLRB, right? Because they're telling workers that now you really will get to join a union. You will really be able to organize a union, and that will make a difference in some people's lives. But it's still a half loaf. It's not nearly enough. And again, that's why I say to Bernie, you sound so good until you say to vote for Biden. I mean, no, wrong. Vote for Cornel West. Let's get back to it. Here's another video. I'm showing a lot of videos. These are all kind of stuck with me, and that's why I'm doing it. This is from our friends at, PBS. I said PBS. Here, this is from our friends. This is a doctor, psychologist, I believe, telling us it's kind of intuitive, right? And then I want to get to a couple of little comments. If you're not going to call me, I'm going to show your comments online because I do want to get your take, and this is how I can get it without without you calling, is simply by showing some commentary from a couple of my recent programs. Here we go.
Some surveys reveal that around 60% of people in the US right now report feeling lonely on a pretty regular basis. And that's pretty devastating from a public health perspective, right? This is worse than rates of obesity. This is worse than rates of diabetes. And everything we know suggests that loneliness might be as big of a public health threat in terms of like the effect that it has on our bodies and our minds.
What's brought this on? Why? Obviously, the pandemic, I think, it aggravated it. But even before the pandemic, people were talking about this.
Yeah, if you look at rates of loneliness, there's lots of evidence that they've been increasing linearly since the 1970s, right? And that's long before the pandemic. That's actually long before some of the other culprits, things like cell phones and so on. And so I think the evidence really points to the fact that there are probably a lot of causes going on at once, but those things are coming together to really make us a much more unhappy and a much more isolated kind of population.
All right, so that's isolation is the key there, such an important key. And we see also from the 70s, of course, is when income inequality really started to skyrocket, especially in 1980, 81 with the Reagan election and the wars against unions that actually began during the Carter years, where he was not a staunch defender of unions. Reagan bringing down the air traffic controllers and then gutting progressive taxation. So the inequality and isolation, which resulted therefrom, where our relationships become ever more transactional, less and less public space. I think it's in that interview. I thought it was in the Essential California. They say, hey, if you're going to have a beer, why not at least go to the pub? And that's a good thought. I mean, yes, wherever we can see other people interact, rub shoulders, rub elbows is a good thing. I agree with that. But what about public spaces? What about rec centers? What about teen centers? That is also largely absent from America today. There's less and less money for them. There's less, where people go to work out is almost always a private place. Don't counties, cities, some do, but we don't have those communal spots. And to the extent we do, again, they're for profit. They're exercise centers that are run by entrepreneurs or corporations. And they're all cost cutting and desperate. The employees at those places are more and more themselves independent contractors, getting paid per class, getting paid by the number of people they sign up, rather than to do a professional job. So all of this greatly aggravates our loneliness. There are ways around it. Guarantee everyone a secure life. Make sure everyone has enough and no one has too much. I wanted to get to this commentary because I mentioned that, what did I mention? I mentioned that I want you to call, but if you're not going to call, then I'll at least get your views. I'll show your views if they strike me when you post. And of course, you don't have to, I'm not curating if you just call in. So here are two that I put together. These are not from the same program, and they are not from the same person, but I thought they were two really interesting ones. And I wanted to, let's start with go in reverse chron. They're posted in reverse chron, so you can see 10 hours ago, and then Jeff's, it says 23 hours, so a couple of days ago. So this is regarding Arlen, and Insight Deluxe 2, who I have no idea who that is, says, Arlen is blue maggot to his core, hard to watch. Yeah, I didn't want to, I don't want this to be insulting Arlen at all, and I don't want it to come out that way, but I wanted to present that view because I do find it, and I mentioned this earlier, frustrating sometimes because I do think Arlen and I are sort of almost on different planets. I'm trying to make points about how both parties are presenting a policy framework or presenting a platform that is antithetical to equality, antithetical to a happier, more sustainable society. And Arlen seems to go in a very different direction, which is, well, it's the Republicans' fault. And if to the extent Democrats aren't better, a lot of that is on the Republicans. And for me, that is hard. That's difficult. But it is a legitimate viewpoint. I don't agree with it. I'm not going to shut that down. And so we're going to, and it, I think possibly is more prevalent. It's certainly more prevalent among Democrats than the one that I have, and that apparently so does Insight Deluxe too, which is that, no, it's the duopoly that's the problem. They're two sides of the same coin. So we have to keep the conversation going. With regard to Jeff, so Jeff says you bring out that argument again. The argument is that we need much higher top marginal tax rates, and we had that, I believe in 36 or 35, whenever Roosevelt, the FDR tax, income tax started with a 91%, or the top was 91%, I think, on income over $1 million. And the only person in Depression era America who had an income that high was John D. Rockefeller. And he was the only one. So he was the only one who paid it. And Jeff says marginal rates mean nothing. Effective tax rates do. And I just sort of smile at that, because the point of the higher marginal tax rate partly is to bring in more revenue, for sure. But it has all sorts of, and he's saying it's effective rate, right? Because the effective rate is what ultimately leads to more revenue. And revenue is important. I don't disagree. But the purpose of the high, very, very high marginal tax rates is, again, to ensure everyone has enough. That's the revenue portion. So yes, if you're paid, if you have $1 billion windfall today from your corporation going public, you're going to have to pay most of that back under the Hal Ginsberg tax code, which would be very similar to the Rooseveltian tax code of the 30s. So yeah, you have that $1 billion payday, you're going to pay over the first few million, you're going to probably be paying 90% back. And you'll probably figure out all sorts of ways, right, not to take that tax day. But in a way, that's okay. If you keep the money in stock, then it's in the company, which hopefully will build and lead to more jobs. But there's a lot of other benefits to having that high tax code as well, a high top marginal rate. Corporations now are incentivized often to pay huge salaries to top managers and to keep what they pay to employees at a minimum. If you have a low top marginal tax rate, relatively low, like 35, 40%, not that much higher than the 28% that most people are paying, well, why not just pay it all to one person? But if almost all of the money above a certain level, say above the first million or first few million, if almost all of that, the great majority, is going to the government, then the corporation isn't going to want to pay its top executives that much, because they're not going to want it. They're going to say, don't pay me all that because I have to give it to the government anyway. Better to invest it in people. Better to invest it in capital improvement so we have a long-term sustainable enterprise. And of course, you have to keep the money in the United States through tariffs and other ways to make sure that the investments are made here. But that's just one of the beautiful beauties of the top marginal rate, is it reduces inequality, not just by taking away the money from the richest and highest earning, but also by incentivizing employers, who are often usually the highest earning people in the company, by incentivizing them to not pay enormous salaries in the first place. So I don't really understand. Marginal rates actually do mean everything. It's really important to understand that the marginal rate is the relevant rate. That's what causes people to modify their behavior. If all of your taxes, no matter how much you make, is taxed at the same rate, 35, 40%, whatever it is, if that's the effective rate is the same as the marginal rate, then you might as well just pay yourself the absolute maximum you can if you're one of those few people who are pretty much in control of your own salary, like the CEO of a company is, like somebody who can determine whether to take their corporation to sell the stock that they own in a company. They're kind of in charge of their own salary, their own wages, their own income. If the effective rate is the same as the marginal rate, you might as well maximize it. But if the marginal rate is much higher above a certain level, then you're going to try to keep your income, or at least the great majority of it, below that margin. And that means we have more equality, which means we have more happiness. All right, we're going to move on because I really, I'm very critical of the Democrats. And I know, other hosts like Jimmy Dore, who I have a lot of respect for, but not as much as I used to, and Brianna Joy Gray, for whom I have a lot of respect and pretty much as I used to, focus more on the Democrats, or almost exclusively on how bad the Democrats are, and they spend less time or very little time on Republicans. And I get that. I mean, it's sort of like, how many times do you talk about how a scorpion is poisonous? Scorpions are poisonous. I could say that a million times. That's their nature. They're going to sting that frog every time they carry it across the river, or the frog carries them across the river, because it's in their nature. It's in the Republicans' nature. But what I do want, what I demand, is something better from what's supposedly the alternative, the opposition. And since they've demonstrated as well that they seem incapable of being progressive, we need to look, I believe, to a third option. But as long as the focus is only on the Republicans, or largely on the Republicans, or exclusively on the Republicans, then you're going to say, well, yeah, the Republicans suck. We all know that. I guess we have to vote Democratic. But my answer is no, they're both bad. But I don't want you to think that because I spend more time talking about Democrats, I don't recognize, or there's an argument that the Republicans aren't also really, really bad, or perhaps worse. So let's deal with that. And I have clips from the Republican debate where Trump wasn't. And I mean, these are just three. This is hardly a representative sampling. It's nothing like that. It's just designed to kind of give you a feel for how bad the Republicans are. I mean, you already know, I think, from my videos, from my show, from others, how bad the Democrats are. But this is just extraordinary. This is from, this was Fox, but I got this from, or I first saw this from Senator Nina Turner, and I was just astonished at what, at this guy. I mean, it was just really quite amazing to me what Tim Scott had to say. And obviously it flummoxed. And I want to just get this from the beginning here. I don't want to have to miss any of it. I was a little bit, it obviously just struck Senator Nina. So here's what, and I was disappointed too, because I was like hoping, well, maybe every now and then Tim Scott seems sort of reasonable. Maybe he's not so bad. Well, listen to this.
On education, the only way we change education in this nation is to break the backs of the teachers' unions.
All right, so, look at the violence of that. The violence, break the backs of the teachers' unions. The one group of people that is actually really trying to make life better for poor, that's what they're dedicated. They're teachers. Public school teachers don't deserve a decent life, according to Tim Scott. We've got to break the backs of the teachers union. And of course, Nina is wow. It's so awful. It's so effing awful.
On education, the only way we change education in this nation is to break the backs of the teachers' unions.
And the way he says backs, there's a real violent, and I say, right, sick, violent, crazy. America today, there's something, it's clearly, and I was talking about football, right? It's such a violent sport, and it makes people demented, mentally ill as a result. But wow, what a statement what a painful, horrible statement by Tim Scott. By the way, there's a lot of diversity at least the ones I'm going to play among the crowd there at the Republican debate. And I know I'm not getting Chris Christie in there and some of the other kooks, Pence, but these three just really struck me as what they had to say. Maybe it's because I was hoping for a little better. Maybe that's why. All right, here is another South Carolinian. I got South Carolinian Nikki Haley. By the way, these people are all in the single digits. Well, no, the last one we'll hear from isn't. Here's Nikki Haley.
The third rail that nobody wants to touch is the entitlements, Social Security, Medicare. How would you manage the entitlements to try to start getting our arms around soaring debt?
Well, you know, you've got multiple candidates on that stage that said they wouldn't touch entitlements, including Trump. And any candidate that says they're not going to touch entitlements means that they're basically going to go into office and then leave America bankrupt. Social Security is going to go bankrupt in 10 years. Medicare is going to go bankrupt in 8. So the way we deal with it is we don't touch anyone's retirement or anyone who's been promised in, but we go to people like my kids in their 20s when they're coming into the system and we say the rules have changed. We change retirement age to reflect life expectancy. Instead of cost of living increases, we do it based on inflation. We limit the benefits on the wealthy, and we expand Medicare Advantage plans.
All right, so Medicare Advantage is a disaster. It's costing us much more money than the alternative, which is, of course, to negotiate with Big Pharma and bring prices down. She says, and this was also, Senator Nina also focused on this one, she says we've got to have social retirement age reflect actual longevity. She points out, does Senator Nina, that the average black man lives to be 68. So if the retirement age is 65 now, and you know it really can be up to 70 because that's when you maximize your take home, your payout. Black men have 3 years to retire. So Nikki Haley wants to cut your Social Security, which is the only security, true security that Americans have, and it's barely enough. For some, it's not enough. She wants to cut Medicare. It's extraordinary. This is your Republic. I mean, they're so bad. They're so bad. You know, when I talk about Biden, when I talk about Democrats, when I talk about Jamie Raskin, I'm like, God, you can't vote for these people. But then when I look at the Republicans, I'm like, oh my God, maybe they're the only choice. Because you certainly can't vote for them. All right, let's get to somebody who actually at one point says something I kind of agree with, but then of course he pulls back and goes full on nut job crazy, just like, folks, I mean, what, 240-36371, what's your reaction to this? I mean, when I listen to this, and I really try to avoid them, when I listen to the Republicans, I kind of get why a lot of you are saying we have to vote for Biden, Harris. I understand it a little better. But I'll say this. Trump isn't the craziest of the crazies. You know, it's always like, oh, if it's Trump. These folks they've gone even fuller crunchy, nutty, kooky. So, and scary. Not just crazy, like funny, old, crazy, I don't know. Guys, like wild and crazy guys. These are dangerous, violent kooks. So here's Vivek. This is Ramaswamy is the one who Vernon seems to like. Well, he does say one thing in here that's not so bad.
Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine.
I would not. And I think that this is disastrous.
All right, so I'll stop it right there. Yes, good, finally. Because everyone else on that stage, Trump wasn't there, was talking about how we've got to stand with Ukraine. We've got to keep giving them more and more and more. So Ramaswamy, to his credit, and by the way, I think you just saw Robbie Swabby for a second in that video. So this is, from Fox, but via The Hill, they had this video more easily for me to copy. So thank you, The Hill. So here, The Hill Rising. So let me play a little more. But so Ramaswamy for a second there sounds sane. No, I would not support more arms for Ukraine. Wow. A tiny little sliver of light in the darkness of the Republican debate. But wait, it's going to be extinguished very quickly.
That we are protecting against an invasion across somebody else's border when we should use those same military resources to prevent across the invasion of our own southern border here in the United States of America. We are driving.
Wow. So that gets, it's the invasion across the southern border that we have to worry about. Now, it is true. There's a large number of people coming across. And it is a problem in Texas. There's no question. But the violent rhetoric, and this is from a man who I'm going to assume, maybe I shouldn't do this. There certainly have been Indian families in this country for hundreds of years, from the country India. But I'm going to assume he's a relative newcomer to, not him, but his family's relatively new to this continent, to our shores. And to be so dismissive and aggressive against immigrants from Mexico and Central and South America it's ugly. It's ugly is what it is.
Russia further into China's hands. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat we face. And I find it offensive that we have professional politicians on the stage that will make a pilgrimage to Kyiv, to their Pope, Zelensky, without doing the same thing for people in Maui or the south side of Chicago. Okay.
All right. So that part I kind of am okay with, right? I mean, the idea that Zelensky is some kind of a hero is flat out crazy, I think, at this point. I mean, if he was a real, and I'm not going to bash Zelensky except for he was, definitely had campaigned, as I understand it, on a peace platform with Russia, that he was going to try to ratchet down tensions with Russia. And instead, he fully embraced NATO. So I do have issues with Zelensky. I don't think he's a great hero. I don't want to be too hard on him because he's a victim now of Russian aggression and also of the U.S. He's kind of caught between the two hegemons, the hegemon in the region, Eastern Europe, Russia, and of course the global hegemon, the United States. So he's kind of caught between us. So I don't want to be too hard on Zelensky, but Ramaswamy's right. We should be focusing on helping people in Maui. We should be helping people in inner cities of America and in rural areas that have been so devastated by the neoliberal regime. But to pander to the xenophobic anti-immigrant crowd is hardly laudable. All right. Thank you so much for watching, for being part of Halitics. I see there's some comments from Shade. Shade, I'm sorry I didn't get to your comments. I'm not going to do that now because I'm going to end the program. I hope you all have a great afternoon. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching Halitics.